You know it's this. Take a perk and talk it and see. Money swollen like sis. They done perfected the kid. Got a billion who take on my hater. Nothing better. Put out the road I just spent. I know we got $1 million. The devil, they shit ain't not cheaper than
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to MangaMuse. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the first part of What If Deku Meets Incredibles. Special note, this fanfic is written in a masterpiece of Yellow Pikmin 88 on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Ever since the phenomenon of quirks came into existence and gradually became commonplace amongst the majority of mankind, a lingering 20% of humanity were left unable to inherit these powers. While every part of the world had its share of quirkless people, America held the highest concentration of the percentage with a 1:10 ratio. Because of that, not only did they have less heroes, or supers as they dubbed them, but also higher crime rates. This required those in America who did inherit quirks to step up higher than other heroes to give the people hope and salvation, even going so far as to hide their identities to truly become symbols of peace and justice. And the majority of these great supers were trained and situated in the US's capital of hero activity, Metroville. The sun shone brightly over the metropolis as the millions of citizens went about their daily lives. Occasional cheers rang through the streets as a random small crime would be stopped by a super before carrying on to wherever they might be needed next. At a nearby apartment, two of those supers were in the middle of getting ready for another day of making the world a better place. A pair of men seen sitting at a table talking over morning coffee. Whilst both of them were lean, muscular and blonde, their hairstyles and height varied considerably. One was taller than the other with his hair sticking up at 2 points in the front like a pair of horns, while the other man's hair was more slicked and his muscles weren't quite as prominent. These two heroes, when in costume, were known as Mr. Incredible, the strong hero and Metroville's #1 super, and All Might, the recently titled symbol of peace from Japan. Ever since he departed from his homeland to perfect his quirk one for all in the States, All Might's reputation had been on a rapid rise throughout his journey, which eventually led to him becoming the #1 hero of Japan. He'd made many friends along the way who supported his goal of making a world where everyone can smile, one of his closest being the acclaimed inventor David Shield, but his only rival had been the man sitting before him. Due to the similarities of their strength-based quirks, Mr. Incredible and All Might had competed many times in a race to who would become #1 first. Nobody knows for sure who won, but it didn't matter as both had proved to be outstanding supers in their own rights and the closest of friends at the end of it all. However, All Might's occupation in America was close to ending as he trained as much as he could and believed it was time for him to return to Japan to complete some unfinished business. He would answer to his friends when asked. Despite the somber news he would soon be leaving, the symbol of peace would see the USA off with a smile, and he felt no better way to do it than by attending a special event involving his rival, friend and roommate, which they happen to be discussing right now. "So it's all ready for tonight?" All Might asked, setting down his empty mug. "Yep, it should be quite the gathering, provided everyone makes it on time," Mr. Incredible replied as All Might briefly left the room and returned dressed in his costume. "Well, time to go to work. I'll see you later, buddy," he said as he opened the apartment window and leapt out. "Would it kill you to use the door?" Mr. Incredible called after him. "I never have before and I won't start now," his rival's voice echoed back. Mr. Incredible rolled his eyes as he left the building as well after dressing himself in a black tuxedo. He then got into a shiny black car and headed off into the city. As he drove through the streets of Metroville, Mr. Incredible began to hear a broadcast on the radio, stating that the police were pursuing of a car full of gunmen in a high-speed chase. The super pressed a button causing the radio to flip over, revealing a digital map of the city. He then turned a large dial to the option Isolate Pursuit, which zoomed in on the map, revealing the distance between himself and the car chase. "Yeah, I've got time," he smiled after glancing at his watch before turning the dial to merge pursuit and auto drive, causing the car to begin to drive itself as Mr. Incredible lay back in his vehicle, which began to don him in his hero costume. At the same time, his car began to change shape into a more sleek form with a large rocket engine at the back which ignited in a burst of speed, sending him hurtling toward the criminal's location. But as he was en route, he noticed an old woman calling to him from the side of a park. Never one to turn down a citizen in need, Mr. Incredible stopped the car to address the woman. "What is it, ma'am?" he asked. "Oh, Mr. Incredible. My cat, Squeaker, won't come down." The woman pointed to a small ginger cat stuck at the top of a tall tree, the poor animal meowing for help. The American hero glanced at his navigator and saw he was about a minute ahead of the pursuit. "Certainly, ma'am, but I suggest you stand back in case there's trouble." "Oh, don't worry, he's quite tame," the woman insisted as Mr. Incredible uprooted the tree and heeled it on its side while she stood underneath ready to catch her cat. Though the animal proved to be rather stubborn, as Mr. Incredible seemed to have trouble shaking it off the branch it was clinging to. "Come on, kitty, let go now," he gritted as he noticed the gunmen and police had rounded the corner and were about to pass him. Shaking the tree a little harder, the cat, though it put up quite the fight, finally came loose as it landed safely in the woman's arms. No sooner had he succeeded, Mr. Incredible swung tree over his head and onto the road seconds before the criminals collided with it, knocking them both out. "Two crooks with one tree," he grinned as he placed the tree back in the ground. "Thanks, Mr. Incredible. You've done it again," one of the cops said proudly as his partner loaded the criminals into their car. "Oh no, I'm just here to help," Mr. Incredible replied humbly just before he heard another police report coming from his vehicle. "Attention all units. We have a tour bus robbery." Mr. Incredible glanced at his watch. "Tour bus robbery. I've still got time. Officers? Ma'am. Squeaker." He bid the citizens good day before getting into his car before he heard a young male voice beside him. "Cool, ready for takeoff." Mr. Incredible looked in surprise to his right to find a boy sitting in the passenger seat. He was blonde and freckled, wearing a blue eye mask and cape along with a white shirt that displayed Mr. Incredible's insignia. "What the? Who are you supposed to be?" he asked. "Well, I'm Incredible," the boy replied heartedly. "What? No, you're that kid from the fan club." Mr. Incredible recognized the child as he tried to place his name. "Brothy. Brody? Buddy. Yes, Buddy. My name is Incredible," Buddy insisted. Mr. Incredible sighed as it seemed this hadn't been his first encounter with the boy. "Look, I've been nice, I've stood for photos, signed every scrap of paper you pushed at me, but this. No, you don't have to worry about training me. I know all your moves, your crime-fighting style, favorite catchphrases, everything. I'm your #1 fan," Buddy proudly declared, hoping his admiration for the hero would convince him. But Mr. Incredible wasn't convinced as he ejected the fanboy from his car before speeding off to the next crime location. Hey, wait. At the same time Mr. Incredible had been handling the car chase, however, All Might had been dealing with a crime of his own. After he'd left the apartment, the symbol of peace had received word of a raid on a business center. From what All Might had heard, the criminals were using both a helicopter and had a couple of quirk users working with them as well. And in an effort to divide the police, a few members of the gang had taken a tour bus hostage and were currently driving it aimlessly through the streets. What a mess. All Might muttered to himself as he leapt through the air. "You make a good point, Bob. Can't the cops just keep the city clean for 10 minutes? He looked to see both criminal parties were in sight. The chopper was heading in one direction while the tour bus was driving in another. The police scattered between the two. Staying true to his duty to help those in danger smile, All Might chose the tour bus as he landed and rushed after the vehicle. He saw there were a total of 5 terrorists on board. One was driving the bus while the others were standing, 3 of which had guns, so All Might assumed the 4th was a quirk user. All Might grinned widely as he let out a mighty laugh and ran alongside the bus, drawing the passengers' attention. "Fear not, citizens, hope has arrived, because I am here," he proudly said his catchphrase as the hostages did indeed begin to smile. "It's All Might, the symbol of peace. We're saved." "Shut up," one of the terrorists silenced the hostages. "Don't even try, All Might, or we'll blow their brains out. Don't test us." "Oh, I wouldn't dream of it. You'd just get a failing grade," All Might joked, causing some of the citizens to laugh, We're serious. One more step and the criminal suddenly frozen mid-sentence, literally as he'd become encased in ice along with the other terrorists, save for the driver who was looking back in shock, though All Might only laughed as he recognized the phenomenon. You really had to cut in like that, Frozone? And I was just getting started. Come on, you know these high-speed hostage situations are my specialty. Another voice said from the rooftops as All Might looked to see another super had arrived. He was a dark-skinned man in a blue ice-themed bodysuit along with a white visor covering the top half of his head. The ice hero, Frozone. How's it hangin', red, white, and blue? He smirked as he began to skate alongside All Might, throwing patches of ice in front of himself. I had everything under control until you decided to steal my thunder. Like you've never done that to me. Hey, I'm still in control here, the driving terrorist spoke out. Oh yes, almost forgot about him. I'll let you do the honors, Emma. Frozone offered as All Might got behind the bus. Ladies and gentlemen, fasten your seat belts, he declared, and thankfully the citizens were indeed buckled in as All Might grabbed the underside of the bus and lifted it slightly so only the front wheels touched the road. With this he was able to dig his heels and bring the vehicle to a gradual stop. Knowing the job was a bust, the driver grabbed the closest passenger's bag and ran. Hey, he stole my purse, a woman shouted, but before All Might or Frozone could go after the criminal, a cracking sound came from one of the frozen terrorists before they suddenly broke free, their body covered in large spikes causing the passengers to scream as he smashed through the bus window. Damn, looks like my ice couldn't hold that one, Frozone cursed. I'll deal with him, you go grab that purse snatcher. No, All Might refused. You should go after the chopper, the police need you. Leave this one to me and then I'll catch up with our little runaway. Alright, I'll leave you to it. Catch ya later, man, Frozone agreed as he skated off to stop the other gang members, high-fiving All Might as he passed him. You're gonna regret not accepting his help, All Might, the Spike villain said wickedly, because by the time I'm done you'll be Japan's #1 pincushion. All Might only laughed in response to the threat. Thank you for the joke, villain. I find it so much easier to smile when you laugh, don't you agree, citizens? He grinned at the hostages who had exited the bus by this point and were safely with the police, having caught up with the chase. Don't mock me, you grinning meathead, the villain roared as he shot several long spikes at All Might, who reared back his fist. Nebraska smash, he bellowed as he threw a punch which sent out a shockwave, blowing the spikes away and sending the villain flying back. But before the spiked man had a chance to recover, All Might was already upon him, his second attack ready. And now, he began as he pulled back his might-glowing fist. Detroit smash, he delivered a solid uppercut to the villain's jaw, shattering several of his teeth and launching him into the air before the fiend came tumbling back to earth, where All Might caught him by the back of his shirt. Officers, I believe this belongs to you. He grinned as the crowds cheered his victory. Thanks a lot, All Might. We're always grateful for your time here. The cop thanked him. No trouble at all. All Might grinned before he turned to the woman who'd been robbed. And don't worry, miss. That scoundrel won't have gotten far. You'll have your purse back before day's end. Thank you, All Might, she replied as the symbol of peace jumped off into the air to finish the job. Indeed, the purse snatcher hadn't got too far after the police had reported his robbery, as the man was currently hiding out on a rooftop going through the stolen bag for anything of value. But he wasn't alone for long as he suddenly heard a voice behind him. You know, you can tell a lot about a woman by the contents of her purse, but maybe that's not what you had in mind. The criminal looked to see it was Mr. Incredible who'd found him as the blue-clad hero approached him. Growing desperate, the man pulled out a gun as he aimed it at Mr. Incredible. Hey, look! All of a sudden, a red-gloved fist shot out from the left and slugged the robber in the face, knocking him to the ground. Mr. Incredible was surprised to see the hand was attached to a long arm which retracted like an elastic band before a slender superwoman with chestnut-brown hair strolled out of the shadows. She was wearing a red and white costume with a sparkling eye mask over her face. Elastigirl. Mr. Incredible identified her. Mr. L. Incredible. She greeted him back as she went to pick up her target. No, it's all right. I've got him. Mr. Incredible insisted, to which Elastigirl rolled her eyes and let the man fall back to the ground. Sure, you've got him. I just took him out for you, she pointed out. Sure, you took him out. His attention was on me, Mr. Incredible countered, though he was smiling. A fact I exploited to do my job. Elastigirl fired back with a smirk. My job, you mean? A simple thank you will suffice. Thanks, but I don't need any help. It seems I was a little too slow. The pair of heroes turned their heads to find that All Might had arrived on the scene. Thank you for catching my criminal. Your criminal? Mr. Incredible questioned. Yes, he was a runaway from the tour bus I saved earlier. Yet you let him get away? There was a villain present. I had to stop him first. Whatever you say, All Might, but it's finders keepers and I found him. Whatever happened to ladies first? Elastigirl cut in. Well, whatever happened to equal treatment? Hey, look guys, the lady got me first. The criminal, having regained consciousness, sided with Elastigirl, who only punched him in the face again without looking. Well, we could share, you know? She then suggested. I work alone. Mr. Incredible replied boldly. A sultry smile crossed Elastigirl's face as she approached him, stretching herself up to his height as she teasingly walked her fingers up his chest. Well, I think you need to be more. She swiftly weaved her body over under and around him before returning to her original shape. Flexible. I'd say get a room, you two, but we are on the clock. The two supers jumped as they'd seemingly forgotten about All Might. Are you doing anything later? He asked, slightly mesmerized by Elastigirl's flirting. I have a previous engagement. The heroine winked before she turned on the spot and somersaulted away across the rooftops. Mr. Incredible let out a long whistle as he watched her go before he noticed All Might grinning at him. Oh, don't you say a word, he pointed. I'm saying nothing. All Might replied with raised hands while Mr. Incredible went to cuffing the robber to a pipe. Now, you just stay here. They usually pick up the garbage in an hour, he said before the sound of gunfire filled the air, followed by someone calling his name. Hey, Incredible, red, white, and blue. Hey, Frozone, Mr. Incredible, and All Might waved to the ice hero passing through. He was skating across sheets of ice through the air in pursuit of the helicopter from the heist. Shouldn't you be getting ready? He asked the strong hero from afar. I still got time. Mr. Incredible responded, checking his watch for the third time today as Frozen managed to grab onto the chopper. Starting to cut it close there, Incredible. Perhaps we should call it a night. All Might suggested. There's still an hour left, I'll be fine, Mr. Incredible reassured. All right, I'm going to see if Frozone needs any backup. Don't be late, All Might said before he went off in Frozone's direction. Not long after he was gone, though, Mr. Incredible heard a cacophony of screams. He's gonna jump, someone shouted as Mr. Incredible saw a spotlight being shone on a man standing at the top of an enormous bank building. Moments later, he threw himself off the edge, sending the crowd into a frenzy of horrified cries. Thinking fast, Mr. Incredible took a running leap off the roof and caught the man as he was falling, sending them both crashing through one of the windows of the bank. I think you broke something. The man groaned under him after they came to a stop. With counseling, I think you'll come to forgive me, Mr. Incredible replied before he heard a strange noise from nearby. After moving the man to safety, he began to search the room for the source of the sound. As he hunted, he noticed the sound was a strange beeping noise. As he walked into a hallway where the bank's vault was located, the noise began to grow louder. Approaching the vault, Mr. Incredible placed his ear to the surface, and as he did so, the beeping suddenly became rapid. Eyes widening, Mr. Incredible jumped away just as a blast exploded throughout the building, blowing the vault door off its hinges, smoke billowing out of the opening. As the smoke began to clear, a figure emerged, clutching several bags of loot. It was a man dressed like a mime with belts of explosives crossing over his torso. Looking around, the man grinned proudly at the destruction he'd caused just as the vault door was rolled away to reveal Mr. Incredible coughing away the smoke. Bon voyage, he identified the villain who spoke back to him in French. Monsieur Incroyable, Mr. Incredible. And Incredible. The two looked to see Buddy of all people standing in the broken window. Incredible, Bon voyage repeated with confusion as Buddy's shoes suddenly ignited, causing him to hover over the Mr. Incredible. Hey, aren't you curious about how I get around so fast? See? I have these rocket boots, in spite of his impressive gadget though. Mr. Incredible was only irritated by the boy's arrival. Go home, buddy, now. Petit oaf little oaf. Bomb Voyage added just as annoyed. Buddy sighed as he ignored the villain. Can we talk? He asked Mr. Incredible as he began to monologue while admiring his reflection in the vault door. You always say be true to yourself, but you never say which part of yourself to be true to. Well, I've finally figured out who I am. I am your ward Incredible. And now, you have officially carried it too far, buddy. Mr. Incredible replied, grabbing hold of Bomb Voyage who had tried to slip away during the conversation. Now Buddy was getting frustrated as well as he just couldn't get through to the hero. This is because I don't have a quirk, isn't it? Well, not every superhero needs a quirk, you know. You can be super without one. I invented these. I can fly. Can you fly? Fly home, buddy. I work alone. Mr. Incredible replied coldly, which felt like a knife to the heart for Buddy to be so harshly rejected by his idol. Etat tenu est totalement ridicule and your outfit is totally ridiculous. Bomb Voyage added insult to injury. But Buddy wasn't ready to give up just yet. Just give me one chance, I'll show you. I'll go get the police. He said as he headed back to the window, unaware that in the moment, Bomb Voyage raised his palm, causing an explosive to pop out of his skin and attach itself to the fanboy's cape. A detail which didn't go unnoticed by Mr. Incredible. Buddy, don't, he called out, though the boy didn't realize the danger he was in. It'll only take a second, really. No, stop, there's a bomb. Mr. Incredible yelled in horror as Buddy took off on his rocket boots just before the strong hero let go of Bomb Voyage and grabbed onto Buddy's cape, the two flying off into the skyline. Let go! You're wrecking my flight pattern. I can do this if you let go. Buddy panicked as Mr. Incredible grasped wildly for the bomb. He eventually managed to knock it off, but lost his grip on the cape too, sending both him and the explosive falling towards the city where they landed on a monorail track. Moments later, the bomb exploded, leaving an enormous gap in the tracks, just as Mr. Incredible sat up to see the last thing he wanted to, a train approaching. Knowing there was no time for it to stop on its own, Mr. Incredible jumped the gap and ran towards the train head-on. He stopped, raised his hands and braced for impact. With a mighty crash, the train collided with the hero, sending the passengers inside flying and forcing Mr. Incredible back, who strained against the car as it began to slow down. It was a close call, but he managed to stop the train just as the lead car was hanging off the edge of the gap and the lights went out. Take this one home, and make sure his mom knows what he's been doing. Mr. Incredible was now leading Buddy to a police car as the emergency service were now doing what they could to get the passengers off the train. I can help you. You're making a mistake, hey, Buddy protested as he was forced into the car. The injured jumper. You sent paramedics? Mr. Incredible asked about the suicidal man. They've already picked him up. The officer confirmed. Good. The blast in that building was caused by Bomb Voyage, who I caught in the act robbing the vault. Now, we might be able to nab him if we set up a perimeter. You mean he got away? A second officer asked. Well, yeah. Skippy here made sure of that. Mr. Incredible gestured to Buddy, who now seemed outright angry. Incredible. You're not affiliated with me? Mr. Incredible said angrily before his watch started beeping. Holy smokes, I'm late. Listen, I've got to be somewhere. But what about Bomb Voyage? The cop asked, concerned, but before Mr. Incredible could answer, a boisterous laugh filled the air as an equally muscular figure landed in front of the group. Fear not, citizens, justice is served, because I am here. All Might grinned as he stood there, tall and proud, with Bomb Voyage restrained under his arm. You're All Might, the symbol of peace. The cop recognized him. Oh please, officer, I've barely made the title, honestly. All Might replied, rubbing the back of his head. Vous me dices, tous pour damn you, All Might. Bomb Voyage cursed as the pro bopped him on the head, knocking him out before he turned to Mr. Incredible, extending his hand. Well done, Mr. Incredible. I was just passing through when I saw how you stopped that train after the tracks blew up. You saved a lot of lives tonight. Though he was somewhat miffed from having missed his chance to stop Bomb Voyage himself, Mr. Incredible shook his fellow hero's hand gratefully. Thank you, All Might. Your help is appreciated. though this could have been avoided if some people would learn not to get involved in matters that don't concern them. He added with a cursory glance to which Buddy looked away from venomously. I can understand that. There are some feats that aren't achievable without a quirk. But the fact remains that evil was stopped and there were no casualties. Now then, if we're done here, I believe you have a previous engagement to attend, do you not? All Might asked. Gah, you're right. Mr. Incredible remembered as he got into his car. Thanks again, All Might and officers. If there's any more trouble, I'll be there to stop it. With those parting words he drove away, All Might and the cops seeing him off with salutes. After driving some distance, Mr. Incredible finally arrived at his location, a church. His car shifted back into a normal vehicle, and the super stepped out now back in his tuxedo, though his eye mask was still attached. No longer was he Mr. Incredible, but now Bob Parr, his secret identity. As he entered the church, he was welcomed by a slim African-American man. This was Lucius Best, the secret identity of Frozone and one of Bob's closest friends. Upon seeing the man himself enter, he smirked at him. Is the night still young? Bob asked. You're very late, Lucius replied. How do I look? Good. Oh, the mask. You still got the mask, Lucius pointed out as he removed the item. Bob then approached the main doors, cracking his neck in preparation. Showtime, he said before pushing open the doors and striding down the aisle towards the bride waiting for him at the end. It was none other than Elastigirl, or as she was known out of costume, Helen. Robert Parr, will you have this woman to be your lawful wedded wife? As the ceremony went underway, Helen whispered to Bob. You're late. When you asked me if I was doing anything later, I didn't realize you'd actually forgotten. I thought it was playful banter. It was playful banter. Cutting it kinda close, don't you think? That's exactly what Toshi said, Bob recalled. And yet he's not even arrived yet. Anything to do with you? You need to be more flexible, Bob countered humorously. Helen smiled. I love you, but if we're gonna make this work, you've got to be more than Mr. Incredible. You know that, don't you? She asked just as the priest finished speaking. So long as you both shall live. I do. Bob promised to both the marriage and the vow he and his soon-to-be wife just made. I pronounce this couple husband and wife. With that the two kissed while their audience applauded. It was a small crowd which consisted of several supers, a short woman with black hair and glasses, and a man with gray hair and dressed like a government agent. But just then the doors burst open and a booming voice sounded from the end of the aisle. Sorry I'm late. Bob and Helen looked to see All Might had arrived. Only he wasn't in costume, but rather a black suit with a yellow undershirt. Toshinori Yagi was now his identity. Though I'm surprised you got here at all after sticking your foot in your mouth, Bob. That's rich coming from you, given the time you're here. Take your own advice, why don't ya? Helen laughed. So what kept you? The police asked me to clean up the mess at the monorail scene after I delivered Bomb Voyage to them. One of the drawbacks of our line of work. Bob smiled. Yeah, you keep telling yourself that, Bob. Lucius smirked as Bob went to shake hands with All Might. Thanks for coming, Toshi. Happy to be here, buddy. Toshi smiled. And Helen, might I say you look absolutely stunning. I know you've always been a knockout hero, but I always associated it with the high number of criminals you've punched. Helen chuckled as she shook his hand too. Hey now, the bells haven't even rung, and you're already trying to get me to break my vow. I never would have dreamed you'd take up villainy, Toshinori. Toshi could only laugh at her quip. Oh, I almost forgot. My wedding gift to you both. He remembered as he handed Bob an envelope, who proceeded to open it. Tickets to Japan? It's only fair that you and your wife get to visit me sometime after all you've done for me in my time here. My friends, I consider the both of you important people in my life, and I want to make sure our friendship never wanes over time. The two supers smiled thankfully at Toshinori as he pulled the two of them into a hug, which they gratefully returned. What are you standing over there for, Lucius? Get in here. He grinned invitingly. Nah, I don't want to ruin the moment between you three. Lucius raised his hands only to be reeled into the group hug by Helen as the four laughed together before separating. Well, Mr. and Mrs. Parr, I wish the two of you a long and happy life together. Toshi smiled his signature smile to the couple. As long as we both shall live, no matter what happens," Helen promised. "Right, Bob," her husband grinned back at her confidently. "Hey, come on, we're superheroes. What could happen?" In a stunning turn of events, a superhero is being sued for saving someone who, apparently, didn't want to be saved. The plaintiff, Oliver Sansweet, who was foiled in his attempted suicide by Mr. Incredible, has filed a suit against the famed superhero in Superior Court. A TV showed footage of Mr. Incredible saving the suicidal man from the night of Bomb Voyage's attack before cutting to the man himself, seen in a neck brace and accompanied by a lawyer who began to spout an incriminating rant. Mr. Sansweet didn't ask to be saved, Mr. Sansweet didn't want to be saved, and the injury received from Mr. Incredible's action, so quote, causes him daily pain. "Hey, I saved your life," Mr. Incredible protested, outraged by what was happening. "You didn't save my life, you ruined my death, that's what you did," Sansweet complained back. "Listen, you ungrateful little piece of..." My client has no further comment at this time. Mr. Incredible's lawyer stopped him mid-sentence before he might say anything else. 5 days later, another suit was filed by victims of the L train accident. Mr. Incredible's court losses costed the government millions and opened the floodgates for dozens of superhero lawsuits the country over. It is time for their secret identities to become their only identity. Time for them to join us or go away, a judge decreed as a spiritually broken Mr. Incredible slowly left the court with a cursory glance and farewell wave to the public as they booed him out. Under tremendous public pressure and the crushing financial burden of an ever-mounting series of lawsuits, fear and controversy, the American government quietly initiated the Superhero Relocation and Quirk Prohibition Program. The supers will be granted amnesty from responsibility for past actions, in exchange for the promise to never again resume hero work. Nor shall any quirk users be permitted to utilize their powers in public for any purpose. Where are they now? They are living among us. Average citizens, average heroes, quietly and anonymously continuing to make the world a better place. The TV was then turned off to reveal Toshinori's reflection in the screen, a devastated look on the #1 hero's face. In a landslide of diplomatic madness and prejudiced smearing, all American heroes had been silenced and any future generation's dreams had been callously crushed under the boot of the government. An entire continent, ripped from the United Nations of Heroes. Toshi sat there, back in his home in Japan, alone. He'd only left America a few months ago, and yet it was like the country he'd known was now a distant memory. He thought about his super friends back in the States, Mr. Incredible, Elastigirl, Frozone, all of them. They were legends, and now their very livelihoods were gone. What would they do now? Could they find work outside of heroism? What if Lucius married as well? Would he have to hide his quirk? What if Bob and Helen had children? Were they to be forced to raise them to live a lie? The symbol of peace felt the need for some air as he left his house, his iconic smile nowhere to be seen. "I'm sorry, guys, but it looks like this is one situation I can't help by being there. I can only hope it improves over time. For the sake of the next generation," he thought sadly as he continued to walk aimlessly, not noticing a young woman with dark green hair walk past him, pushing a buggy. She stopped momentarily to look back over her shoulder in surprise, as did her baby who poked his head of messy green hair out of the buggy curiously. "Mama, who dat?" he pointed as the man walked off into the distance, his image shining but his heart shadowed and completely unaware that his future had just passed him by. 15 years had passed since the American government had illegalized hero work and public quirk usage. To say the transition had been difficult for the supers was a gross understatement. Having to hang up their capes to settle for menial jobs was difficult to say the least. And for some, having their way of life made into a crime was nothing short of a death sentence. Former supers had become homeless, having been unable to hold down non-hero jobs. There was a large spike in vigilante numbers as well as many heroes chose to go over the law's head to continue their past heroic duties. Some were caught and jailed while others remained at large. One of them was Mr. Incredible. The former #1 American hero, now known only as his secret identity, Bob Parr, had found himself with one of the worst cases of midlife crisis. not only having to work for an insurance company, one in which he spent hours having to deny claims to the unfortunate, though sometimes secretly directing them to other departments that could help them or get yet another breathing down his neck from his boss, but also knowing criminal activity was still commonplace and not being able to do anything to help, had put a heavy weight on his heart and spirit. Even more so on his body, as the strong hero had grown rather fat over the years of inactivity. He could hardly go to a gym. His quirk would show for certain, and even then the weights were nothing to him. So as he sat in his tiny cubicle, having just got off another earful from his boss about authorizing payment for some home invasion victims, Bob felt the desperate need to clear his head as he brought up the news on his computer. The top article discussed an interview with Japan's #1 hero, Endeavor. Bob frowned as he scrolled through the article, coming across an image of a skeletal man with shaggy blonde hair and sunken blue eyes. Toshi, it had been a few months since All Might had retired as both a hero and the symbol of peace when he sacrificed his power to stop the villainous tyrant, All for One. A battle that shook the world as millions watched his final victory as well as his send-off words. Now ... it quote s your turn. Bob, Helen and Lucius were all deeply saddened to see their old friend join them in retirement too, though seeing him go out in a blaze of glory and showing no regrets did bring the three of them peace of mind. Whatever Toshi was doing now, they were sure he was still smiling, and it only made Bob even more frustrated knowing that unlike his friend, his body still had plenty of fight left in it, and yet he was being forced to let it go to waste. While her husband's desire to return to heroism remained as strong as his quirk, Elastigirl couldn't say the same for herself. Helen Parr had done her best to embrace her quirkless lifestyle, having become a dedicated housewife and mother. Though it would be a lie to say she didn't miss being a super, she knew there was nothing that could change the government's mind, so better to roll with the changes and appreciate what she still had to be happy about, and that was a loving husband and 3 beautiful children, 2 of which were currently sitting with her in her car. One was a young boy of around 10 years old with blonde hair, named Dash, and the other was a baby boy with a spiked tuft of brown hair atop his head and wide blue eyes, whose name was Jack. While the baby didn't appear to have any quirk to speak of, not that he could even speak, being only one Dash, as his name implied, had a quirk which allowed him to run incredibly fast. So fast in fact that he couldn't be seen by the naked eye, or even a camera for that matter, as his school teacher had tried to use to catch him pulling a prank in class. The old pin on the chair trick, to be precise. Despite getting away with it, the lad wasn't happy as he looked away from his mother, who sighed. Dash, this is the 3rd time this year you've been sent to the office. We need to find a better outlet. A more constructive outlet, she suggested as Dash scoffed back vehemently. Maybe I could, if you'd let me go out for sports. Helen frowned. This wasn't the first time her son had brought this up. Honey, you know why we can't do that. I promise I'll slow up. I'll only be the best by a tiny bit. Dash insisted. Dashiell Robert Parr, you are an incredibly competitive boy, and a bit of a show-off. The last thing you need is temptation. You always say, do your best. But you don't really mean it. Why can't I do the best that I can do? Plus ultra? Dash questioned, raising his fist with a hopeful smile, his mother wincing at the mention of her old friend's motto. Right now, honey, the world just wants us to fit in, and to fit in, we just gotta be like everybody else. Dash's smile fell as he furrowed his brow. You mean the country wants us to fit in? Dash corrected bitterly, they're too scared to go beyond. He spat, his frustration visible. It's the same result for us. The law's the law, even if we don't like it. But Dad always said our quirks were nothing to be ashamed of. Our quirks made us special. Everyone's special, Dash, Helen stated. Which is another way of saying no one is. Dash muttered as he returned to staring out the window. They kept driving for a few minutes until they eventually reached a high school where Helen spotted her 3rd child, firstborn and only daughter, Violet, standing by the steps of the school. She was a teenage girl of about 15, with long black hair which covered one of her eyes. She appeared to be watching one of her classmates, a boy, and he might have noticed her himself if her head hadn't suddenly vanished into thin air. After he walked away, she deactivated her quirk and crouched behind the steps, a little flustered. He looked at me, she whispered before she heard her brother call to her. Come on, Violet, After getting into the car, Helen threw her daughter a knowing glance. I saw that, Missy, so to speak too. Violet shrank in her seat at being caught while Dash snickered. Busted. You're one to talk, young man. Helen reminded him, causing Violet to smirk before turning her gaze to her phone. The screen showed a picture of a boy with glowing green hair about her age, maybe a year older, battling a giant monster while carrying a little white-haired girl on his back. Violet narrowed her eyes as she stared at the picture, as though she recognized the person in it from somewhere. The family all arrived home soon enough, Bob's being the most eventful after a mishap involving his car and a skateboard. Let's just say he didn't have to worry too much about his witness when they saw him lift the vehicle over his head in anger. The man sighed as he headed to his study, a room adorned with framed newspaper clippings of his past heroic deeds, an old telephone the authorities or people of power would call him on for aid, and his old supersuit sitting in a glass display case. Bob looked about himself before he opened a drawer on his desk containing a lockbox which upon opening contained stacks of dollar bills and a post-it note on top which read New Life. Bob reached into his pocket, pulling out $50 which he added to the pile. Not a big investment this month, Bob, but every penny counts, he said to himself before locking the box again and putting it away. Still adding to the emergency fund? He jumped at the sound of his wife, who was standing in the doorway behind him. Always good to have a safety net, he answered. He knew he couldn't hide the box from Helen, but she at least didn't know his true intention for the money he was putting in it. He doubted she would agree with his plan at this point. Better to tell her when he was closer to his goal. It was a good idea when you told me about it. Those stories about college funds the other parents say are true, you know? Helen chuckled as she looked at the framed pictures on Bob's desk. She frowned when she came to one of a preteen Violet at about 10 years. Her hair was shorter, and she was laughing as she was sitting on All Might's shoulders, who was holding a 5-year-old Dash in the palm of his hand, the little boy copying his famous grin. And next to that one was another of the two siblings, only with a third child, a green-haired boy, standing between them with his arms around each of their shoulders and all three laughing. Bob noticed his wife staring at the picture as he frowned as well. Been a while since we last saw Roman 6 laugh like that, he noted. She's only gotten shyer, Helen added sadly. Maybe it wasn't a good idea to save our gift from Toshi for so long. That little taste of freedom really changed her. I would have hoped for the better, said Bob. She really is a gifted girl, she shouldn't have to hide it. Bob, we've been over this. Helen sighed, knowing what he was implying. Let's just go eat, okay? Yeah, let's. Bob conceded, though he couldn't help thinking back to the day they took that picture. 5 years ago. The tickets that Toshinori had given Bob and Helen were no ordinary tickets, but ones specifically made for heroes. They didn't have a set date, so they could be used at any time in the future. Having had 2 of their children at this point, and also having gone through their first move, Bob and Helen thought they could really use a holiday. It had been 10 years since they last saw Toshi in person, though they did occasionally write to him when they could, so they decided it was a good time to use the tickets. After letting him know ahead of time, they met All Might at the airport, whereupon the symbol of peace greeted them with open arms, which he used to scoop the par couple up into a crushing hug. Bob, Helen, it's been far too long. How are you, my friends? It's good to see you too, Toshi. Bob smiled. You look almost the same as when we last met. All Might laughed loudly in response, his friends not catching the hint of nervousness carried in it. Sorry, I can't say the same about you, Bob. You look like you've put on a pound or 2. Hey, it's not exactly easy for me to stay in shape these days. Bob rebuked, causing Toshi to bite his tongue. Ah, yes, I forgot. Sorry. It's all right, Toshi. But anyway, don't you want to meet your niece and nephew? Helen asked with a smile. Of course, let me see them. Toshi grinned before he spotted the young Violet and Dash peeking out from behind their parents. Kids, say hello to your Uncle Toshi. He's an old friend of your father and me. Helen introduced him as the #1 hero got down on one knee to look at them with a smile. Both children seemed at a loss for words as they stared at his giant form before Violet beamed and ran over to hug his leg. Hi, Uncle Toshi, I'm Violet. She greeted him, causing him to laugh joyfully and pat her head. Well, I'm very happy to meet you, Violet. You have a smile as wide as mine. He grinned, causing the little girl to copy him as best she could, her brother soon doing the same. And what's your name, little man? Dashiel. But my hero name is Dash. Dash grinned before he began to run circles around his hero uncle, which surprised him. Whoa, now there's a quirk that goes with the name. Toshi laughed. And what can you do, Violet? He looked down to see she wasn't there anymore. Violet? Where'd she go? He asked, looking all around while Bob and Helen chuckled in amusement. I'm over here, Tilda. He heard his niece's voice as he realized what she had done when he saw her clothes floating in midair. Oh, I wonder where she could be, he asked playfully before he felt a tap on his back, and in a flash he whirled around, causing her to squeak and reveal herself. You're a sneaky little duo, aren't you? He grinned as Dash came to a stop next to his sister. These are two amazing kids you have here. He smiled at Bob and Helen, who nodded proudly before Toshi handed them his phone. One for the family album, he suggested as he placed Violet on his shoulders and placed Dash in his palm. Everyone say plus ultra. Plus ultra, the three of them yelled as Helen took the picture. Now then, Toshi said as he put the kids down. While I go drop off your bags at my place, why don't you four take some time to see the city? You can't come with us, Uncle Toshi, Dash pleaded. Don't worry, I'll join you all later. Just thought I'd save you from wasting time with your luggage. You all go have fun and I'll meet up with you soon. All Might said as he picked up the family's bags and leapt off into the air. Is it just me or did Toshi start steaming just now? Bob asked, swearing that he'd seen wisps of vapor coming from his friend. Yeah, I thought I saw it too, Helen agreed. But let's take his advice and see the sights for now. The kids are looking rather antsy. As the Parr family went about touring Tokyo, they were amazed to say the least with how many supers were on the streets. Those who weren't heroes could be seen wielding their quirks for whatever task they were applying them to, and even super children were running around playing games with their powers. The family eventually reached a park where Dash began to speedily play on everything he was tall enough to reach, while Violet watched some koi fish in a nearby pond. All the while their parents sat on a bench enjoying the view. I'm glad we waited till we had the kids. Helen smiled. I know, just look at them, not a care in the world. Bob agreed before adding in thought, and nobody forcing them to pretend to be normal. It's just such a shame they can't do the same back home. The couple turned their heads when they heard Toshinori's voice, but as they did so they gasped when they saw not the tall muscle-bound hero, but a short scrawny man with wild blonde hair tied back in a ponytail and sunken eyes. At first the Parrs thought they'd mistaken the man's voice for their friend's, but when he grinned at them they knew it was in fact All Might. Toshi? What in the... Helen spluttered. Yeah, pretty gross, huh? How? Bob asked as Toshi sat beside them to explain why. But as the parents listened they didn't notice what was happening with their children. As Dash continued to run about the park, he didn't see where he was going and suddenly collided with someone knocking them to the ground. Oops, sorry. He apologized as he saw the person he'd knocked down was a boy about a year older than his sister with spiky pale blonde hair. As he looked back over his shoulder, Dash froze when he saw the boy glaring at him with blazing red eyes and gritted teeth. Hey? He growled. What's your problem? Dash felt his knees shaking as the preteen boy stood up. I didn't. If you have something to say it, the angry kid snapped. Quit stuttering. I get enough of that from Deku. Hey, leave my brother alone, Violet spoke up, having noticed the situation. This brat's your brother. Well, tell him to watch where he's going. He's only 5, let it go. Violet scolded, which only irked the boy further. You're not the boss of me, girl. So how about you take this little runt and beat it before I blow you both to kingdom come? Stop it, Kaken. Another voice was suddenly heard, causing the blonde boy to groan. Violet and Dash saw an 11-year-old boy had arrived on the scene with curly dark green hair and freckles. Oh great, as if I didn't have enough to be pissed off about. Get lost, Deku. I gotta teach these extras a lesson, Kaken snapped. No, that little boy didn't mean any harm and his sister's only defending him. You can just walk away. Typical Deku, always trying to be the pacifist. But then, that's all a quirkless loser like you can do, isn't it? and you can't even do that right. Dash, go get mom and dad. Violet murmured to her brother, who nodded before zipping off. Kaken, please just leave them alone. I don't care what you do or say to me. I'm not gonna stand by and let you hurt them. Deku refused to back down, though he was trembling. This brought a sadistic grin to Kaken's face as his palms began to spark, which made Violet's eyes grow wide. Fine. It's always more fun taking my anger out on you. Anyway, just know you asked for this, Deku, Kaken roared as he lunged towards the green-haired lad. His palm reeled back in preparation to attack seconds before Violet threw herself between him and Deku. The park was soon filled with a loud explosion which drew everyone's attention to the scene. As the dust settled, Kaken looked on with an anticipated smile, waiting to see the damage he'd done. But his expression soon turned to shock as he saw before him a large purple bubble made of light. And inside the bubble were Violet and Deku behind her, both unharmed, with the former holding her hands out and the latter shielding his face with his arms. Deku opened his eyes when he realized he wasn't hurt and gasped when he saw the bubble. Violet lowered her hands, which made the bubble disappear, as she glared at Kaken. What was that? Deku whispered in astonishment. My force field, Violet smiled. It's part of my quirk, along with my invisibility, she explained before smirking at Kaken. Try all you like, but you can't touch me, and I won't let you touch my friend either. Kaken snarled as a vein popped on his neck. Friend? Who'd want to be friends with a loser nerd like him? He doesn't even have a quirk. So what? He stood up for me and my brother. That's all I need to call him a friend. Kaken growled as he looked ready to fight again, but out of the corner of his eye, he saw Dash was coming back with his parents in tow. Knowing the game was over, he sucked his teeth in relent. TCH, you aren't even worth my spit, he said before he trudged off, not long before the rest of the pars arrived along with Toshinori. Roman 6, is everything all right? Helen asked, concerned. We heard an explosion. Yeah, Dash said some kid was picking on you both, Bob said with equal concern. I'm fine, Mom and Dad. I was just helping my friend after he stood up for me and Dash, Violet explained as she showed them Deku, who offered them a shy wave with a smile to match. Helen smiled as she approached the boy. Well, thank you for defending my kids from that bully, young man, she said, patting his head thankfully. Yeah, that was real brave of you, kiddo. Is it all right if we know your name? Bob asked with a friendly smile. Oh, his name's Deku, Dad. That's what the other kid called him, Dash answered, though Deku waved his hands. Oh, no. Deku's just a name Kaken says to make fun of me. My real name is Izuku. Izukumidoriya. The boy introduced himself. Izuku, huh? Violet said. That's a nice name. She smiled sweetly. Thank you, Izuku replied, a little shy from the compliment. What was your name again? He then asked. Violet Parr. This is my little brother, Dash, and these are my parents, Bob and Helen. Oh, and that's my Uncle Toshi. She gestured to All Might, who gave Izuku a wave and grin. Nice to meet ya, kid, and thanks for sticking up for my niece and nephew. You're welcome, Izuku replied, completely unaware he was talking to the symbol of peace. Hey, you want to come hang out with us, Izuku? Dash asked eagerly. Oh, I'd love to, but I was just passing through. My mom's expecting me back. We're earing out tonight. Oh, where at? Maybe we can meet up there later, Bob suggested. It's our first time visiting Japan, so we're open to something new. Really? Izuku asked. Well, it's a ramen restaurant we go to sometimes. Here's the address. He scribbled on a journal he pulled out of his backpack and handed the torn page to Bob. I guess we'll see you there then. We eat at 7. We're looking forward to meeting your mom. Helen smiled as Izuku went on his way, waving goodbye as he did so before she turned to Violet. Well, look at you, Roman 6. Our first day here, and you've already made a friend. Yeah, he's cool, even if he doesn't have a quirk, Violet said cheerfully as she watched him go. The month the pars spent in Japan would be remembered as one of the best vacations of their lives, as they not only spent some quality time catching up with Toshinori, but also found new friends in the Midoriyas. After following through on their offer to dine out with them, Bob and Helen found themselves quickly befriending Izuku's mother, Inko, after meeting her. The woman was shown to be as emotional as her son as she tearfully and repeatedly thanked Violet and Dash for their kindness, mentioning how lonely Izuku had been without any friends, a detail which embarrassed the boy something fierce. The Japanese family took it upon themselves to be the pair's personal tour guides during their stay, which ended up being an unintentional favor to Toshinori, as he was often having to take off throughout the day to carry out his hero duties. Something that did irk Bob somewhat, as he couldn't tag along since he no longer carried a hero license. Despite that, however, the holiday led to many happy memories being made for both families, which only made the farewell all the sadder when it finally came time for the pairs to return to the States. "I'm gonna miss you guys," Izuku sniffled as he and his mother came to see them off at the airport. It went without saying that the quirkless boy had become close friends with the pair children over the course of their stay, almost becoming an honorary brother of sorts to them as they bonded over the time they spent playing together. Their favorite game was superheroes. Izuku would always dress up as All Might when they did, which almost led to Dash mentioning his uncle Toshi in context. "We'll miss you too, Zuku." Violet called him by the nickname she and Dash had given him. The two of them were growing teary-eyed as well as they hugged their green-haired friend, whilst Inko embraced Helen. "You and Bob have raised such wonderful children," she said as he pulled away to hug Bob goodbye next. "It's made me so happy to see my baby make such good friends with them." "Well, it's only because he made it so easy for them to like him," Helen chuckled. "You've done well yourself in raising Izuku, so I've no doubt he'll make friends besides our kids in the future." "You're right there, honey," Bob agreed. "Your boy's got the heart of a hero. Quirk or no, that's a fine trait to have as a person." He smiled as he ruffled Izuku's green locks. "You keep on standing now, Izuku, you hear?" he said to the boy he'd grown to see as the nephew he'd never had. "I will, Uncle Bob," Izuku grinned. "And next time I see you all, I'll be a great hero just like All Might." Bob's grin twitched slightly with a smidge of envy at that. "You know, Mr. Incredible's a pretty great hero too," he recommended, Helen hiding her amused smile behind her hand. "But I agree that it sure would be nice to come back again, though I can't say when." "Well, you'll always be welcome in our home if you ever do," said Inko kindly. "Thanks, Inko." Helen smiled before the announcements came over the loudspeaker. "Well, that's our flight. Time to go, kids." "Bye, Zuku," Dash said, giving him one last hug. "I don't care if you don't have a quirk, you're a hero to me." "Yeah, you're gonna be awesome," Violet grinned as she hugged him too. "Well, so are you too. You've got the coolest quirks ever, so I know you're gonna be pros someday," Izuku responded. Though the parents knew it was unlikely their children would get the chance, considering the circumstances, it still warmed their hearts to see them believe in each other, and also broke their hearts, not knowing if they'd ever reunite as they tearfully waved goodbye until out of sight. But the confidence they gave one another wouldn't last long after their departure. For only a couple of months after the pairs returned to America to resume their normal lives, an incident occurred that would bring about an unfortunate change in their kids. It was during one of their school days that Violet found herself happening upon another bullying incident. Thinking back to how Izuku acted, the little girl instantly ran in to defend the victim, and in doing so she revealed her quirk in front of the entire school. Since the intention of the government's bill was to all but erase the concept of supers from the country, Rick Dicker, the pairs' assigned agent, was forced to step in to cover up the event, using his memory wipe quirk to make all the witnesses forget what they'd seen Violet do. Not only that, but the family were forced to move for a second time so that the witnesses' memories of the event wouldn't resurface. The whole ordeal shook Violet to her core. All she did was protect someone, and it got her family in so much trouble. What if it happened again? Though they got off with a slap on the wrist, mainly because she was only a child, she'd overheard Rick telling her parents there were only so many times he could cover for them. Despite being permitted to use his quirk only for government purposes like this, even he was on thin ice with the top brass. This resulted in Violet shrinking away from her once social self. She stopped trying to make friends, for fear her quirk might show around them. Nor did she try to help people in trouble anymore for the same reason. She took her former heroic personality and pushed it deep down inside herself, knowing that if she ever let it out, her family would pay the price. And as for Dash, seeing his once heroic big sister become a miserable loner filled the young boy with rage because he knew whose fault it was. This, coupled with their mother becoming more restrictive on matters that could expose their quirks, lead to Dash becoming a troublemaker, wanting to get back at the stupid suits for making him and his family live like they were on constant trial. And to top it all off, their phone book was lost during the second move, meaning they weren't able to call Toshinori or the Midoriyas again. So it went without saying that the next 5 years wouldn't be easy for any of them. Present time. As the family sat down to dinner together, Dash couldn't help being distracted by the faces his mum was making as she tried to get Jack to eat. "Mom, you're making weird faces again," he pointed out, to which she denied. "No, I'm not. You make weird faces, honey." Bob sided with Dash as he was reading the paper. "Do you have to read at the table?" Helen asked, though her husband seemed too engaged to notice. "Uh-huh. Yeah," Helen sighed before noticing Dash, who was having trouble cutting his food, had resorted to using his teeth. "Smaller bites, Dash." "Yikes, Bob, could you help the carnivore cut his meat?" As Bob went to help, Helen decided to take the opportunity to remind her son of what he got up to today. "Dash, you have something you want to tell your father about school?" "Well, we dissected a frog," Dash said nervously, trying to avoid the subject, but Helen was having none of it. "Dash got sent to the office again," she said, though Bob was focused on cutting as he muttered. Good. "No, Bob, that's bad." "What?" "Dash got sent to the office again," Helen repeated. "What? What for?" Bob asked, now fully alert. "Nothing." Dash literally lied through his teeth with a glare aimed at Helen. "He put a tack on the teacher's chair during class," Helen emphasized. "Nobody saw me. You could barely see it on the tape." Dash sulked, which appeared to impress his dad. "They caught you on tape and you still got away with it? Whoa, you must have been booking. How fast did you think were you going?" He couldn't help smiling at his son's feat. "Bob, we are not encouraging this," Helen scolded him. "I'm not encouraging, I'm just asking how fast." "Honey," a sudden crack broke the conversation as Helen noticed too late that Bob had been cutting Dash's food too long and sliced straight through the plate. The man fell back in his chair, annoyed by his blunder. "Great. First the car, now I gotta pay to fix the table." "The car? What happened to the car?" Not in the mood to discuss it, Bob gave Dash his plate and left to get a replacement for himself. "So, how about you, Roman 6? Helen addressed her daughter, hoping to raise the mood. "Nothing to report," Violet droned back. "You've hardly touched your food." "I'm not hungry for meatloaf," the girl said as she continued to poke at her meal. "Well, it is leftover night. We have steak, pasta. What are you hungry for?" "Tony Ridinger Tilda." Dash sang his sister's crush's name. "Shut up," Violet hissed. "Well, you are." I said, "Shut up, you little insect." "Well, she is." "Don't shout at the table, honey." "Kids, listen to your mother," Bob said from the kitchen, though Dash couldn't resist dropping another remark which pushed Violet over the edge as the two began to fight each other. She began by tackling Dash from his chair while invisible, but her brother was able to wrestle out of her grip and began running circles around her, slapping her each time he passed until Violet stopped him in his tracks with a barrier. "Hey, no force fields. You started it." "Both of you sit down," Helen shouted as she attempted to tie her kids down with her arms. Meanwhile, Bob was still engaged in the article he'd been reading. "Simon J. Palladino, longtime advocate of superhero rights, is missing?" he read aloud as he recognized the person in the paper. "Gazerbeam," he murmured before his train of thought was interrupted by Helen calling for him. "Bob, it's time to engage." The man hurried back to find his wife laying on the table with her arms wrapped around Dash and Violet, who were now fighting under the table. "Do something. Don't just stand there. I need you to intervene." "You want me to intervene? Okay. I'm intervening," Bob said as he picked up both the table and his family, save for Jack, who was laughing at the whole fiasco. But just as the fight showed no signs of slowing down, the doorbell rang, causing the super family to quickly put everything back the way it was before Dash answered the door. "Hey, Lucius," he smiled at the arrival of Frozone, the only friend the Pars had been able to maintain contact with. "Hey, Speedo. Hey, Helen. Roman 6, Jack." The man greeted the family. Hey, nice of you to drop by. Bob joked. Ha, never heard that one before, Lucius said sarcastically before Dash called out to him. Oh, Lucius, he garbled before spitting some water he was drinking into the air. Whoa! In a flash the man froze the water in mid-air and catching the icicle before it hit the ground. Ha ha. Ah, I like it when it shatters. Dash whined as Bob went to join Lucius at the door. I'll be back later. Hey, where are you two going? Helen asked, to which Bob replied. It's Wednesday. Oh, bowling night. Say hello to Honey for me, Lucius. Will do. Good night, Helen. Good night, kids, Lucius said as he and Bob went out the door. Helen glanced at Dash and frowned at the small grin on his face. Don't think you've avoided talking about your trip to the principal's office, young man. Your father and I are still gonna discuss it. I'm not the only kid who's been sent to the office, you know. Other kids don't have quirks. Now, it's perfectly normal. Helen was suddenly interrupted by, to her surprise, Violet, who seemed offended at the mention of the word. Normal? What do you know about normal? What does anyone in this family know about normal? She asked angrily. Now, wait a minute, young lady. We act normal. Mom, I want to be normal. The only normal one is Jack, and he's not even toilet trained, Violet ranted as her baby brother laughed. Lucky. I meant about being normal, Dash added under his breath while Helen sighed. Not exactly an ideal family dinner. Just outside the house, Bob was sitting with Lucius in his car, the two friends laughing as they reminisced about the good old times. The ice hero was currently recounting a particularly funny encounter he had with a villain. So now I'm in deep trouble. I mean, one more jolt of this death ray and I'm an epitaph. Somehow I managed to find cover, and what does Baron von Ruthless do? He starts monologuing. Bob snickered. He starts monologuing. He starts like this prepared speech about how feeble I am compared to him. How inevitable my defeat is. How the world will soon be his. Yada, yada, yada. Yammering. Yammering? I mean, the guy has me on a platter, and he won't shut up. At that moment, a police radio in Lucius' car crackled to life as a message sounded through it. Bob fiddled with it as he listened to the code. 2356, what is that? Robbery? This is just sad, Lucius muttered. Yeah, robbery. Want to catch a robber? No. Tell you the truth, I'd rather go bowling. Look, what if we actually did what our wives think we're doing, just to shake things up? Lucius suggested. As it turned out, bowling night was actually when Bob and Lucius listened in to the police scanner to sneak out and perform vigilante justice. It being the closest thing they had to re-experiencing hero work, though Lucius was clearly beginning to lose interest. Unbeknownst to the two heroes turned vigilantes, however, just across the street a car was parked with its lights off, and its passenger, a woman with silver hair, was watching the pair and talking into a phone. He's not alone. The fat guy's still with him. They're just talking. She spoke to the one on the other end as Lucius and Bob continued to talk. What are we doing here, Bob? Protecting people. Nobody asked us. You need an invitation. I'd like one, yes. We keep sneaking out to do this. And, you remember Gazerbeam? Yeah, there was something about him in the paper. He had trouble adjusting to civilian life, too. When's the last time you saw him? I don't see anyone from the old days, Bob. Just you, and we're pushing our luck as it is. Oh, come on. Toshi always. Toshi lives in a whole different world from us, Bob. Lucius frowned. You can't compare this to what he does, or did at this point. When even he's retired by now, it may be time to think about getting with the program. It's not like he chose to retire, he was forced into it after that fight. But we can still do good, Bob insisted. It was fun the first few times, but if we keep doing this, we're gonna get... We have a report on a fire, the police scanner reported, which sparked a buzz of excitement in Bob. A fire? We're close. Yeah, baby, he cheered as Lucius started the car, knowing he'd lost the argument. We're gonna get caught, he muttered nonchalantly before they drove off with Bob hollering all the way, the mysterious car tailing after them unseen. Japan. On the other side of the world, however, it was morning in Japan and Izukumidoriya was waking up in his room at the Heights Alliance dorms of Ua High School. The young hero stretched as he got up and opened his curtains to another day of training to become a pro hero. Contrary to how his long-lost American friends remembered him, Izuku had grown far beyond anything any of them could have imagined, and the reason why would be just as unbelievable to the pars, if not more so if they knew. Izuku made his way to the kitchen where he found a few of his friends' classmates having breakfast together. They consisted of Ochako Uraraka, a girl with chestnut hair and pink cheeks, Tenya Ida, a tall boy with dark blue hair and glasses, Tsuyua Sui, a girl with dark green hair and a face similar to a frog, and Ijiro Kirishima, a boy with spiky red hair and sharp features. "Hey, guys!" He greeted them with a smile which they returned. "Good morning, Midoriya. Good to see you well rested," Ida said. "Hi, Deku. Any plans for today?" Ochako asked Izuku as she sipped her tea. It happened to be Saturday at the time. "Outside of getting some training in at the grounds, not much," Izuku replied as Tsu spoke up. "Well, Momo mentioned a new tea shop opened up near Bagano Park. Ochako and I were planning on checking it out later if any of you want to come along, Ribbit," she croaked. "Bagano, I haven't been there any ages," Izuku said with a hint of nostalgia. "Sounds fun." Indeed. A tea shop is not only a relaxing location but also a suitable hotspot for studying, Ida said enthusiastically. "Of course you'd find a way to work school into it," Ochako chuckled. "So you're all looking to slack off today, huh?" The group jumped as they looked around to see their homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa Aka Eraserhead, standing there, his baggy eyes staring into their souls through his matted black hair. "Mr. Aizawa," Izuku said with a start, "we were only planning to go after our training, sir," he insisted nervously. "I know, I saw. That was a joke," Aizawa said, though with his usual tone always being dull as lead. A joke was the last thing his students thought he was making. "So you won't mind taking Eri with you? I hear Bagano is a well-enjoyed park and I feel she could use some time outside. That, and I've also been called in for a staff meeting this afternoon." "An excellent suggestion, sir," Ida concurred, rapidly pumping his fist. "The young lady needs to get out of her shell at every opportunity. Plus, it'll help for her to have some familiar faces with her," Tsu added. "Good. I'll bring her by the dorm after your training. I'm gonna nap," Aizawa droned as he slouched off. "But didn't he just get out of bed?" Ochako said bewildered. "That's Aizawa for ya. He sleeps like Ida studies. Too much," Kirishima joked. "Hey," Izuku shook his head with a smile as he finished his breakfast and stood up. "Well, I'm heading off, but I'll see you all later," he said. "See you then, Deku." Ochako waved along with the others as he went. The green hero jogged as he made his way to the training grounds, passing the main school building where a car was pulling up. The door opened and All Might stepped out in his yellow pinstripe suit. "Oh, good morning, young Midoriya," he greeted as Izuku passed him by. "Morning, All Might," Izuku waved back as he carried on. Toshinori watched him go before heading into the school to go over any papers he needed to mark. As the afternoon eventually rolled in, All Might made his way to the school board room, where he found the faculty members waiting for him. Aside from Aizawa, the members also included the heroes present: Mike, Midnight, Cementos, Snipe, Ectoplasm, Power Loader, and Vlad King. And at the head of the table was the head of the school, Nezu, the mouse hero. "Ah, All Might right on time. Have a seat," he greeted Toshi, who sat next to Aizawa. "Now then, the matter I'd like to discuss with you all is one that I fear we have failed to notice for too long. Mostly due to the troubles we've been handling here over the past year." "And what's that, sir?" Cementos asked curiously. "As I'm sure you remember, the world of heroes suffered a great loss when the United States government illegalized heroism along with quirk use over a decade ago. It was a sad day for history," All Might agreed, his mind immediately going to the thought of his old super friends. "Indeed. But lately there's a matter that's been bothering me. At first I thought it was just happenstance, but now I feel it may be part of something much bigger and more sinister." Nezu then turned on a monitor which displayed several missing person articles, including the one about Gazerbeam. Many of the people in these articles are former American heroes. Snipe recognized the names and/or faces. That is pretty ominous. Present Mike noted. But heroes go Mia all the time in every country. Present Mike added. That is true. So what compelled you to gather these reports, sir? Midnight queried. The fact that all these people are heroes isn't the only similarity, Nezu stated. The manner in which they went missing is also similar. Their last recorded action was leaving the country on an uncharted flight. That last detail got a reaction out of some of the faculty. I received word a few weeks ago from Tsukaichi that one of Japan's pros is the most recent among them. All Might spoke. From what he told me, they were last seen taking a flight on an unbranded aircraft. That's right. The Stone Hero Mortar. The agency he's with haven't heard from him in a month. Vlad King mentioned. Which lead to me drawing a connection between our missing hero and the others from the past 6 years. This demands a serious investigation, as I have reason to suspect that an unknown villain is behind these disappearances. Nezu stated as All Might thought to himself. Bob, I sure hope you're okay, pal. But as the retired pro pondered his thoughts, far away on an uncharted island, the missing hero, Mortar, was in the middle of a dense jungle. The stone hero was bloody and beaten with a limp in his step. I have to get out of here. They need to know before it's too late, he thought, clutching his arm which appeared to be broken, until he felt a giant shadow loom over him, and he barely had time to turn and face the source before he was crushed by a giant, black metallic claw, his attacker glaring at him with a single blue eye. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 2. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author Yellow Pikmin 88 on FANFICTIONnet. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.